The full upper frame and the center legs are all now together. It's quite secure. They're all bracketed in place, so those shouldn't be shifting. And now that I know where those are permanently going to sit, we can actually install these lower legs and get them shimmed so they're flush on the edges. I got the saw set up still, and then get those installed.
In the last episode, we left off with a functioning bed frame, and today's goal is to take it to the next level and basically make it functioning bed frame version 2.0. To begin, those center 4x4 legs are now fastened in place. We are confident that they are no longer going to move, and because we know they're no longer going to move, now we can cut those 2x4s to length that are going to be the drawer supports that run horizontally out to the left and the right side. In the last episode, when we lined it up with one side of the frame, we found that the other side stuck out by something like a half inch to an inch. It was like a massive difference. But I didn't want to trim it in the last episode because we didn't know exactly where that center leg was going to be sitting. Now we do, so now we can cut those lengths. After a quick test fit, you'll see that I go back out and I retrim both of the ones on the left side. As I said through several of the first episodes, dry fitting everything repeatedly is going to be key to getting the perfect fitment that I was looking for. And now that I'm happy with the fitment and the flushness to the outside face on both the left and the right side of the bed, we can move on to the next portion, which is mounting these sideboards around the entire perimeter of the frame. Now for today, we're just going to mount the upper half because most of the lower half is actually the face of the drawers, and it's not going to be able to get installed until our drawers are built and until we have the drawer slides in place. With that in mind, this bed I actually thought looked pretty good with just the upper faces in place, and if that's where you want to stop for this whole project, by all means you can do that and just use bins as underbed storage instead, but I would still obviously stain the upper half and stuff as well. As I said repeatedly in the first couple of episodes, eliminating these drawers will save you a lot of effort, a lot of tools, and a lot of time. So if you're looking at this and you're thinking that's way too intimidating of a project, when you see just this with the frame at the end of this episode, just getting to that point with no drawers is a lot more achievable as a starting project. And to be honest, I still think it looks so much better than any off-the-shelf furniture you could buy for anywhere near the price and materials that you would pay. But getting off of my motivational speaker soapbox for a minute, how do you actually install these? Well, I have marked down in the description which ones go where on the bed. This is the same thing from the first episode description when we were cutting everything. Then I am loosely fastening a clamp at the two far sides of the bed so that those become the pivot points for the board when I make adjustments to the height. I am setting this board so that the top of it sits 2 inches above the 2x4 on the frame that it is next to. I'm using a carpenter square just to keep that depth consistent across, and as you'll see, I kind of scraped down the whole side to make sure I have a nice consistent depth the whole length of the board. And to make small adjustments to raise or lower it, I'm tapping it very lightly with a hammer. Now one thing I want to make sure you're aware of is that if you tap wood with a hammer hard, it will leave an indent in the side of the board, and you'll either have to sand that out or live with it later on. So if you're really slugging at this thing, I would put another block of wood in between the two. Now I've done projects like this before. I know roughly how hard you can hit a block of wood before it starts to dent. I am not swinging that hard. I am also not making massive adjustments using the hammer. But what you're looking for is for the board to be roughly centered, so you have about the same overhang on both sides. You want that 2-inch depth along the whole length, and then you want to tighten the clamps at that point, but you want the clamps to be as centered as possible so that when you're putting more pressure through the clamps, you're not angling the board between the top and the bottom of it, and it is still level when you're looking at it vertically. Basically, make sure that you're keeping all right angles everywhere all the time. Otherwise, when you install that bottom board, it's not going to line up properly and it's going to look a little bit weird, and you might be able to catch it with your eyes. I would also add at least one more clamp in the center so that this thing is less likely to shift before you start screwing it in. But once you are happy with the board and you are ready to fasten it a little more permanently, we are going to break out our wood screws and fasten them through those holes that we pre-drilled in part 3. They should be on the 2x4 on the frame on the outside wall. You should have 2 holes on each end, and then it should be staggered. I believe it was every 6 inches from there. Now when you're screwing these in, start at one end of the board, only put 1 screw in, go back and make sure nothing shifted and that everything is still exactly the level you want it to be. Then put 1 screw at the far side so you know it's not going to move. Then go back and put all the screws in the middle. And for the record here, I am using 2-inch Spax wood screws to attach the frame to these outside faces. I'll put a link in the description below. It might not be the exact same screw I used, but it'll be pretty similar just so you have an idea of what you can use. One final note I want to make here is that it is very easy to overdrive these screws, and by that I mean screw them in well past the surface of that 2x4. If you go too far, eventually these will stick out of the 2x8 face on the other side. I recommend screwing these in basically as little as you possibly can so that the screw head is at most flush with the face of the 2x4. And a big reason for that is after we do some of the final sanding and trimming, we're going to take these boards back off to do the final staining and polyurethane. But when we reinstall them after that, these screws will have to go in a little bit deeper then than they are now to get a nice firm grip, which means you gotta leave yourself a little bit of space, and you don't want to overshoot it now, or else you won't be able to get the screw to grip next time unless you go way too far into it, and then you risk either splitting it or again coming out of the face of that 2x8 on the outside. If your drill has an adjustable clutch, turn it all the way down for this, but even then I would still be extremely mindful because a few of mine still went deeper than I expected with the clutch turned all the way down. Screwing too deep, you know, just relatable content, guys. Relatable content. As you can see, this is already starting to resemble our final product, but the added bonus is if you're just doing the frame, these will also hold your bed slats in place because of that depth difference, and it makes the frame a little bit easier to use. But that was getting towards the end of this day, so let's jump to me talking about what my plans were next.
It's about 9 o'clock at night. A certain someone is getting very impatient. However, it's actually looking pretty good. So I got the side panels on for the upper half for all 4 sides, which means I can at least get the slats on. Obviously, I've got a bunch of stuff I got to clean up first to kind of, you know, have a room that I can navigate again. So I'm going to do that now and then try to get the bed slats on and then the mattress itself on, and hopefully actually be able to use this tonight. So what I'm going to have to do is I'm going to have to sand everything flush on the edges while it's assembled. That way I have no weird gaps and hooks here on the edge, both top and bottom. I got to do that for all 4 corners. Again, that's got to be while it's assembled. Then after that, when I take these back off to go stain them, I have to insert those bottom parts prior to reinstalling these sideboards. Reason being, there's just not quite enough clearance to get them slid into those brackets that I have holding up the 2x4s here in the center, with this here overhanging on the other side. The reason for that is there's so little clearance because of how closely I shimmed it when I was trimming the length on it. Either way though, that's a job for tomorrow. I haven't decided if I'm pulling this whole thing outside to sand it or if I'm just going to sand it in here. I just don't know if I can navigate this whole thing outside the way it is. I might be able to pull the legs and get it, but even so, I'm worried about banging up all the edges. Even when I was trying to adjust it, I did chip some of these edges, which I was a little worried about. I mean, it'll give it a little more of a rustic look, but I just don't want this thing to look beat to crap on day one. Trying to avoid that and just have something nice for once, but you know, that's life, I guess. Anyway, calling it quits for the night. Let's get this cleaned up and then set up.
And there you have it. Bedframe 2.0 is completed. Actually, Bedframe 2.0 might be like the stained and finished and pretty version. This might be like 1.7, but I think I called it 2.0 at the start of this, so let's just continue with that theme. Either way, you can now store all of your tools and stuff under your bed because, hey, you've got underbed storage now. But with the slats and the mattress set up, let's give this its maiden voyage and get the dog seal of approval and discuss the plan going forward.
What do you think? I think I need to shower. I think I'm fucking gross. Alright, the bed has survived one night of use. No creaks, very sturdy. No complaints so far. So, I do have to still sand the edges. It's raining out, so I can't really drag it outside to do it anyhow, and I still really don't want to do it in here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually use it a few days, kind of like it is right now anyhow. That's going to let it settle in a little bit more. The wood's going to get more to where it wants to naturally sit, and then once it is settled in, that's when I'll do all the sanding, and that's when I'll add the lower drawers and stuff as well to get those all dry fit. All the lower boards are either going to be doweled to those top boards for like the foot and then the other end, or for the drawer faces, those are just going to be attached to the rails. So those positions are fairly mobile and they're only really relative to where the top boards are. Therefore, to make sure I don't have any fitment issues down the road, I just want to make sure those top boards are really settled prior to adding everything else on. So like I said, let's give it a few days to settle and then we'll continue with the build.
For those wondering, I waited about 10 days prior to moving on to the next phase of this build. Realistically, after 4 days to a week, it's going to settle in fully. I was just being a little bit extra sure, and again, I was waiting on good weather. So next time we'll resume with sanding this and getting the lower parts of those sideboards prepped. But either way, that's going to do it for this episode. Thank you guys for watching, and I will see you next time.